TNA is glowing in the most attention they've got in a really long time. And they turn around and absolutely diarrheaed on themselves, completely ruining any goodwill they could possibly have at every single turn. Whether it was back in January of 2024 when they rebranded themselves as TNA, then they immediately fired Scott D'Amore. Then there were several releases of people's leaving. Then there was some people in creative that took off. Now they get a little bit of attention from a crossover with WWE NXT, and Jordynne Grace loses. So clearly there's going to be some people who are going to have a certain feeling about that, considering she's the TNA Women's Champion. But all else has not failed, because they have a pay-per-view the very next weekend and they say, well, maybe somebody big from WWE will appear at the TNA show. And then that didn't happen. So now a bunch of people are complaining and they're very, very mad about Tatum Paxley, who is a young lady who is trying very hard, is going up the roster of NXT pretty slowly, but she is in motion. She made her appearance at TNA Against All Odds in an open challenge against Jordynne Grace. Of course, she lost. We'll get into that momentarily. But there's a lot of people who are very upset about this Tatum Paxley thing. People who, quite frankly, did not watch the NXT show or have not been watching NXT in the weeks leading up to this, when they pretty much told the story that it would be Tatum Paxley. But the idea being is that somebody like, I don't know, Bianca Belair is going to show up to NXT to lose to Jordynne Grace because, well, Jordynne Grace is the TNA Women's Champion. Not likely. Not likely at all, actually, that any top-level female wrestler in WWE, if they're not in Scotland already, they're not likely to go to Chicago to lose to Jordynne Grace. Secondly, you are already feuding with NXT talent. Tatum Paxley, young lady who has coveted the Knockouts title for the last several weeks that Jordynne Grace has been featured on NXT. Jordynne Grace actually beat two NXT wrestlers in losing to Roxanne Perez, but most people didn't pay attention to that. They just said, well, she lost to Roxanne Perez. They forgot that she beat somebody before she wrestled Roxanne Perez, and she beat somebody else afterwards. So she beat two NXT talents so far. But it's also not over. We don't know how far it'll go. But poor Tatum Paxley, being bullied online by people who, quite frankly, didn't watch the show, didn't understand, don't know who she is, and just say to themselves, well, it's not name versus name, or position versus position. In reality, TNA is a much smaller company. Their relationship is primarily with NXT, not with the main roster of WWE. So anybody from NXT, for the most part, would have been a much smaller name than the literal world champion of TNA. So you weren't going to get, unless it was Roxanne herself, in which case it would have been just 50-50 booking. But when you consider that Jordynne Grace is not very well known to the wider audience, and all the attention she brought online by jumping ship to NXT for a short period of time, and I'm not saying that it's over, I'm just saying that it was a short period of time, it actually did good for the brand. The championship was visible. The TNA, WWE executives, or the NXT executives, however they're doing it, were, happy with what happened. They got a 2-for-1 deal. Jordynne Grace got to beat two NXT talents. She ended up having to lose to the champion. And because it was the champion, it wasn't that big a deal. And it wasn't clean anyway. Now, we're going to go through that match later, because there was still some stuff going on there. We got to spend some time talking about this absolutely putrid show, TNA Against All Odds, June 14th, 2024. A show that, quite frankly, shows that TNA, no matter what you do with it, they are hampered by terrible creative and bad talent. There's just no two ways about it. The things that they do make no sense. And as usual, when it comes to me reviewing a TNA pay-per-view, last week or 2 weeks ago, thereabouts, I had to review the 20th anniversary episode of TNA Impact, because I thought it would be special. It turned out it was nothing special at all. This time, I actually had to watch the episode of TNA Impact before I watched the pay-per-view. But then I realized I could just do it reversed. So I watched the pay-per-view, then I watched the show. But I'm going to review the pay-per-view and intersperse stories as I had to catch up with some of these things which didn't make sense when I looked at it. And I said, what is this? Why am I watching this? What is going on here? And I had to go get some context. So TNA, unlike AEW, they don't produce things that are context free. You have to actually pay attention to what leads up to these things. So we're going to go through this show. All right. And it's a doozy. It really is. It shows you why TNA is in the doldrums again and again. And it's not because they keep getting into these big spoon, little spoon partnerships with AEW and WWE. That's not it. It is the lack of talent and the lack of creative to book certain talent that tell you that there is something rotten at the core of TNA. They've gotten rid of so many people in creative at this point that I'm really wondering who in the world is booking this shit. Right, like, let's go through this, okay? The Rascals. Young guys, very athletic. They lose to Santana and Steve Macklin, a made-up tag team of two guys who are fighting each other. And my question coming out of this match is, why do they hate the Rascals? Why do these guys lose every single week? And as a matter of fact, Santana beat Zachary Wentz on TNA just a couple of days prior. Well, the day prior, because it aired on Thursday. And I'm just thinking to myself, they hate these guys. They must hate these guys. These guys have put in so much work in TNA. And they are just still treated like jabronis. They are, it is crazy. You would think that, okay, young guys, they're in there paying their dues. Okay, that would make sense. But how many more dues do these guys have to pay? They've been in TNA for 10 years, it seems like. And they're still losing in the opening match of shows? That's insane. And they're losing to Steve Macklin, one of the most bland, fake Punisher. Like, I like Santana. I'm not going to diss him. But Steve Macklin? Come on. Come on, get out of here. The next match, even more laughable. Rich Swann, former world champion Rich Swann, who lost the belt to Kenny Omega and then immediately became a kickbag afterwards. He loses to PCO, a man who is 67 years old or something like that, who is working a Frankenstein gimmick and in a romance angle with Steph DeLander. Yes, sirree. They're doing a storyline where PCO has a crush on Steph DeLander, a woman who is literally less than half his age. I don't even think she's 30, and this guy's 60. Now, I'm not one of these people who say, well, age gaps, all that stuff matters. I'm just looking at it like it's weird. Would you put Undertaker in a romance angle? They've never done that. Of all the weird things they did with Undertaker, they never put him in a romance angle. That's more of a Mankind Kane thing. They don't do that with Undertaker. They have too much respect for the character to put him in a romance angle. PCO, apparently, they have nothing else better to do. They put him in a romance angle. And it's weird. And it's creepy. And it sucks. He defeated Rich Swann in the match because PCO was being mocked by Rich Swann and AJ Francis, who was essentially Foghorn Leghorn in black skin. And this guy, they beat this guy. They beat Rich Swann. Rich Swann sucks. I don't care. It is what it is. But I had to watch PCO, which is a shame. Because I don't really want to see this guy. He's like 70 or something. He's still Frankenstein. He's been doing this shit for 10 years, thereabouts. So then they give you the answer to the question of whether Steph DeLander will go on a date with him. It's milked. And then she finally says yes, she will go on a date with him. And PCO looks like he's in the military. I mean, there's no smile, there's no happy, there's no joy, there's nothing. And you're just like, that's interesting. That's a thing that occurred on this show. Okay, I guess it's an excuse to do some more vignettes and to do some weird stuff, which TNA likes to do, which I appreciate. We're going to get to some really weird things TNA did in a minute. So, okie dokie. That's done. I'm glad that's over. The next match made me want to put my head through a wall. Brian Myers and Eddie Edwards are defeated by, or they defeat the Namath brothers. That would be Nick Namath, aka Dolph Ziggler, and his useless, untalented brother Ryan. You know, that guy, Ryan Namath, who apparently is one of the jock sniffers for the Elite, who is so bad at comedy that if you actually saw a clip of him doing comedy segments, you would think that he was in a library by himself. It was worse than that scene from Joker. You know, at least you felt bad for that guy. When Ryan Namath was up there bombing in the comedy, whatever comedy shop that he was in, I looked at it with such wonder. I was like, I can't believe. I wish I had the confidence of a mediocre little brother. I really wish I did. Just because Dolph can do something doesn't mean you can do it. Yes, he can do comedy because he's funny and he's witty and he's talented. You, none of those things. You are literally none of those things. You are the opposite of him. You probably would get more over being the opposite of Nick Namath than trying to be the same. So undye your hair, stop doing comedy, probably quit wrestling. It's not good for you. And go do something else. You know, there's papers that need to be typed. There's garbage that needs to be dumped. Literally go do anything else. And poor Nick Namath. I mean, you could take Dolph Ziggler off his name, but he's still Dolph Ziggler, meaning he loses when it matters the most. But that's not even the worst part of it. The worst part of this whole damn thing is that Brian Myers is still here. It's that Eddie Edwards is still here. These people are still around. Why on earth are they still around? These are two of the most useless sacks of garbage in the entire business. They bring nothing to the business. Nobody has ever said, man, I need to see that Eddie Edwards match. Nobody said that in 20 years. Nobody has ever said it about Brian Myers. Why are these people champions on your show? Why are these people featured on your show? Why are they winning? I would much rather have completely mediocre and bland Ryan Namath as a tag team champion on this show. Because at least he's young and athletic. Versus these two slobs. And there's just no other way to explain it. They're slobs. All right? This sucks. This is boring. These two dudes, Brian Myers and Eddie Edwards, need to be shot out of a cannon into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Next, and this gets even worse. You know what's going on? Everybody's super excited. They're like, oh man, this TNA WWE crossover thing, they're going to Scotland. Might be a big deal for Joe Hendry. They have Joe Hendry lose to Kaz, Frankie Kazarian, another 40-year-old mid dude. What are they thinking? And then to make this even worse, on the show, main show, you know, the TV product, Joe Hendry is trying to figure out how he's going to break through the glass ceiling and become a world champion or a top guy in TNA. He needs some help. Okay, whatever. He enlists Ace Steel. That was my reaction to Ace Steel. And then Kazarian actually does a really good job here. Says, you know, he's the king of TNA. That's his gimmick. Saying that you have to be born a king, you can't be made one. Then he says, Ace Steel can't make you a top guy. He's not a top guy. He doesn't know what to do. You know, like, how is he going to help you break the glass ceiling? And I was thinking, hey, we're simpatico on this. Kaz, how in the hell can Ace Steel, who have accomplished nothing, whose highlight of his career was a very short, actually one segment at AEW with CM Punk? Why is this a big deal? Well, because they were in Chicago. That's why it mattered. So they put Joe Hendry with Ace Steel in his corner, even though Ace Steel was backstage. And then I'm like, okay, well, at the very least, they're not stupid enough to have Joe Hendry lose to Frankie Kazarian. And yes, they were. Frankie Kazarian beat Joe Hendry. Joe Hendry, the guy that they're trying to push as being a top guy, and he loses to Frankie Kazarian. And then afterwards, this made it even funnier. I mean, this shit sandwich has got so much meat on it. Afterwards, you know, Kazarian continues to humiliate Joe Hendry after he beat him. So he put him like in a chicken wing. He's smacking him across the head, giving him a noogie, giving him a wedgie, all this kind of stuff, just bullying him. Ace Steel comes out there and punches Frankie Kazarian out, essentially. One punch, put him on his back. And I was just like, well, okay. Okay. You think TNA is being done bad by WWE? Look at what they're doing to themselves. Look at what they're doing to themselves. Joe Hendry has so much momentum behind him that people want him to show up in a WWE show. That's how much momentum they have behind this guy. And instead, they beat him to Frankie Kazarian. Moving on, because it just don't get no better from here. It just don't get better from here. Mustafa Ali defeats Trent Seven in a match I did not want to watch, because why the fuck would I want to watch Trent Seven? Secondly, Mustafa Ali is apparently Iron Man, because he kicks out of literally everything. Trent Seven breaks out some of the biggest, if you're a big Japan mark, like a lot of these people are. You've seen some of these moves. They're like Kobashi moves and Misawa moves and all this kind of stuff. And he can perform the moves. But then Mustafa Ali just kicks out of him. Nothing. And he beats him. And not only did he beat him, he embarrassed him. He humiliated him. He did a 450 splash onto his legs, because he's been working the legs the whole match. And then put him in the sharpshooter, and he tapped out. So Trent Seven, nothing. Just blow him in the wind. It's over with. Why do this? I mean, I don't even understand. I guess you had to have Ali on the card because it's in Chicago. Ali has to win because it's in Chicago, I guess, if that's really what you want to do. He has been, I think, undefeated, except for maybe losing a tag team match or two. So they've been pushing Ali pretty strong. There has been some talk about Ali maybe doing some stuff on NXT, or, what they're talking about everybody showing up to NXT, to be fair. But there's some stuff there with Ali. And they're telling a story, to be fair, to be even more fair, that Ali pretty much handpicked Trent Seven. Now, there was a tournament of some description that Trent Seven won by beating Speedball Mike Bailey to get this match. But what they've been saying is, and what they alluded to, is that Mustafa Ali is trying to avoid wrestling Speedball Mike Bailey. That's fine if this match was on television and then Mike Bailey was going to get the big match on pay-per-view. Now, they still may say, well, Slammiversary is a bigger show. It's a more important show. Therefore, we're going to book Mike Bailey and Mustafa Ali at that show. Which case, all right, But Trent Seven, who the hell wants to watch Trent Seven? Why would you want to do that? Match 6 on this show. Austin Bay Club, or ABC, defeated Josh Alexander and Eric Young. Probably the only thing that happened on this show that I agree with and thought that it was a good idea. I can't complain about this. Eric Young, washed. As a matter of fact, no good. No, not talented in the beginning in the first place. If he was not friends with Scott D'Amore, I don't think he ever even makes it in TNA this long. He becomes probably a lot like those other guys, from Team Canada who didn't make it into the 2010s. He's that untalented. He sucks. Josh Alexander, just boring. I just don't like him. Austin and Bay, at least these guys are young. At least they're athletic. They seem to have something going on. They were defeated by the Namath brothers in a really athletic, fun match on the television product. And I wasn't a fan of that because I'm like, okay. But they have been teasing that there's something wrong with these two guys, right? That they've been losing a lot. They had to have a match against each other to work out their differences and all this kind of stuff. So I figured they was building up to a breakup. And since they lost to the Namath brothers, I figured, they're probably going to break up on this show or shortly thereafter or something. But they ended up winning this match, which was a surprise to me. But they beat a made-up tag team of just two random Canadian dudes, both of which look old as shit. So that's fine. Hands up, don't shoot, whatever. Now, before we get into the Jordan Grace Tatum Paxley thing, I want to talk about the pre-show because Jonathan Gresham ended up defeating Sami Callihan. So on the product, they've given Sami Callihan some kind of television product where it's kind of like the TV time of Chris Jericho or the Grayson Waller effect or something like that, where he was, talking about wanting to wrestle Jonathan Gresham and, they wrestled before and Gresham spit ink on his hands and smothered Sami Callihan's face, because Jonathan Gresham went from a guy who, real name, no gimmicks, to full gimmick. Now he's the Great Muta. So this guy means so much to them that they now have bumped him to the pre-show. And I don't know who won that match because I didn't watch it. And I completely, totally forgot. When I started doing this, I was like, I got to mention that match, but I don't remember who won. So I didn't write it down. And I probably did watch it, just didn't write it down. Whatever. Also, and I want to make this because I want to talk about this. One of the best women's wrestlers in the world is Masha Slamovich. And this is a person who has gone completely under the radar outside of people who maybe watch GCW shows. If you watch GCW, you know how great Masha Slamovich is. I've seen her in person a couple of times here in Detroit. She's really good. And she's like girl Sheamus. She's very athletic. She's very physical. She's great. Why she's in a tag team with Alicia Edwards, that sawed-off fart, I have no idea. But they're still the tag team champions. I believe they defeated the Hex, who was Marty Bell and Allison Kay. They beat them on the pre-show. Now, on the main show, or the TV product, I keep saying the main show, Masha Slamovich was beat by Marty Bell. Now, Marty Bell's thick. I love Marty Bell. I like looking at her. She's not a bad wrestler either. But my thing is, Masha Slamovich for a long time in TNA was a wrecking machine. She was a destroyer. She was so good. She was just ripping through women. And then she lost to Jordynne Grace, and it's been up and down, up and down, up and down ever since. This is what I mean by when you look at the talent that TNA has, Masha Slamovich is somebody that you could really do something with. Like, there's a real future there with her. And she's losing to Marty Bell in singles matches. That's nonsense. She should be at least one of the top level women in this company. Now, I get it. She was one for a while, and then she lost. So now you have to bring her down and, maybe work back up. But she should not be so far that she's losing to Marty Bell. Whatever. Now, Jordynne Grace. Jordynne Grace comes out before on the show, what I call the main show. She expressed her disappointment at losing to NXT Battleground, but still says she's a champion. She's still one of the best in the world. Once she had an opportunity, she wants to give somebody else an opportunity. They go to this show, and Tatum Paxley is her opponent. Now, Tatum Paxley got no pop. Nobody knew who she was because she's not that featured on NXT. She's there, but she's not one of the most over girls on the roster. She's not somebody that you would recognize from the NXT product. She looks like she fits in here. And that was the problem, at least for me. I don't have an issue with Tatum Paxley. I don't have an issue with Tatum Paxley being a top contender. I am not one of these people who just wanted to destroy the girl or try to shit talk her or this relationship, whatever, the situationship between NXT and TNA. Whatever you want to call it, it's in its larval form. They broke through that glass ceiling, or they say crossed the line. And now everybody's running with this whole thing that there needs to be a cross-promoted show. And I'm like, whoa, slow it down. I've always been on the slow it down bandwagon. Let's not go that far. All right. Maybe they could do some more matches here and there, as long as they make sense. But let's not do full crossovers yet. Of course, Jordynne Grace won this match fairly easily, with no real outside interference or anything else. So Tatum Paxley, who wanted to be the Knockouts champion, expressed interest in being the Knockouts champion, gets kicked in the nuts, and she loses. Now, let's talk about this thing, because the internet has been abuzz about this Tatum Paxley Jordynne Grace fiasco. And there are so many people who are now saying this thing is a bust. This WWE TNA, even though it's more NXT. And I know that NXT is a subsidiary of WWE. I get that. But if you're doing business with NXT, you're doing business with NXT. It has no bearing on Raw or SmackDown. They're not going to, convert or distort their storylines of lack thereof or what they're doing to do anything with TNA. This is an NXT thing. And I'm pretty much everybody in NXT is either developmental or they are burnout from the main roster who we don't know what else to do with them, throw them in NXT. That's pretty much it. So you're not going to get any of the bigger superstars on this show. It's just not going to happen. Now, just for kicks, I looked at some of the responses because that's the fun stuff for me. I see the show. I think the show is boring. It sucks or whatever. But sometimes I want to know what other people think. So the guy who is the quote unquote WWE correspondent for Voices of Wrestling, he writes this. So what is TNA getting out of this deal exactly? None of the NXT viewers turned into Impact since Grace's debut. They had their women's champion beat by a third-string women's champion in WWE, and they'll get back Tatum Paxley, maybe Brooks Jensen, who's been doing some weird work shoot angle on Twitter, some bill for a Dana Brooke match. The benefit to TNA is getting people who barely get booked on NXT for Twitter buzz will result in $0 drawn. Okay. I don't know ultimately what the goal is of this whole thing. I have no earthly idea. We're looking at this thing right now and we're saying maybe this is what WWE wants to do. They want to send talent to other places. And they have a lot of inexperienced developmental talent. They have more people than they could possibly use on TV. If sending them to TNA could help them, then that's fine. I'm fine with that. They sent a guy, Charlie Dempsey, to send him to All Japan at some point, There's other promotions like Marigold. They'll be getting Io Sky, and there's going to be some kind of announcement between WWE and Pro Wrestling Noah. I don't know what that's all about, and I don't care. But ultimately, WWE is looking at it and saying, we have more talent than we can use. Maybe these other companies want to use some of these talent, and if they got somebody we can use, great. Then that's the partnership. But the issue with TNA is always these self-inflicted wounds that they booked on their own. Somebody like Joe Hendry to lose to Frankie Kazarian, that they won't push anybody new, that they will rather bring in people and then push them to lose than actually bring in fresh talent that they can book to win. And, you can get behind them. Jordynne Grace has been in TNA for a really long time. To think that her stock has dropped or been hurt by this whole thing is incorrect. She's slightly higher than she was before. And yes, it's clearly some kind of scouting mission by WWE that they're going to end up taking her when she's done. And there's probably going to be some other people that they're going to take too. And in exchange, they're probably going to give TNA some talent. I mean, they have released quite a few people that, ended up in TNA, and that's fine. That helps TNA to a degree. Steph DeLander is one of those people, even though it took her a while to get there. Mustafa Ali is another one who, Dana Brooke is another one. They've been trying to reinvent themselves. In any event, it could be like they want to have some sort of excursion program, like where you have a talent and you've beat them. They've been on your TV for a while. We don't know what else to do with them. Let's just send him somewhere else for a while where he can reinvent himself, or at least have other eyeballs see them. And then maybe we'll bring them back. They would have learned a thing or two and they can move up further. That would, of course, assume that they have more extensive time in TNA. And we don't know if it's a one-shot deal, this Tatum Paxley thing, or if she's going to be on the show regularly. So we'll have to see. That's just kind of letting things develop. But since I don't know how far this thing is going, I'm not going to cape for it and say that this guy is wrong. But I will say this. He has a second part to this. New Japan's partnership with AEW netted them Jon Moxley, winning the IWGP title in front of the biggest U.S. houses New Japan has ever drawn. CMLL's partnership with AEW got them Bryan Danielson selling out Arena Mexico 2 weeks in a row earlier this year. Meanwhile, at least from the looks of it, TNA is getting hosed here. Hell, when the TMZ story, Jordynne Grace getting her earring ripped out of a match, they listed her as a WWE superstar. TNA can't even get a pithy TMZ bump. Then again, maybe TMZ just knows how the story ends. Okay, this whole thing about Jon Moxley being featured on New Japan shows. He's an AEW wrestler, right? You do realize and you do hear all the New Japan wrestlers that are upset about that partnership, quote unquote, right? These guys who are talking about him not showing up to shows, that they have shows that he's not featured on because he's supposed to be over here doing stuff in America. How random people are now getting title shots because, the guy who is the world champion in New Japan is not in New Japan. Instead, is wrestling randos in AEW. And look, they've done this before. What AEW is doing to New Japan, they did that to TNA. That one of their guys, their stars, quote unquote, go into a company, win the top title, and then just walk off with it. Beat everybody in the company and then just leaves. I wouldn't be surprised is when the time comes for Moxley to drop the belt, he doesn't drop the belt to somebody who's already established. Because again, at this point, Tony Khan has to approve who he drops the belt to, right? Because he is the guy. And plus, New Japan is a little spoon in this situation. You can say, well, they're drawing huge houses. If WWE wanted to help TNA build a house, they would send one of their top talents. But they wouldn't have done it in an open challenge. They would have said, here, we're going to give you a star that you can promote. And then you can draw a house and draw a pay-per-view number and all that kind of stuff. The fact that it was an open challenge told me from the start that it wasn't going to be much of anything. And then also, because I followed the story, I knew it was going to be Tatum Paxley. So these guys, and there's so many people. I had more to read. I could have read some more, but I'm going to choose not to. I'm going to choose to stop right here because all of them just say the same thing. WWE is just going to raid TNA for talent, and they're going to send them all the rookies. And for me, I say, well, a lot of these talent, when you look at what's going on in TNA, a lot of the guys who have been there for a while, a lot of the guys who are really good, they get no opportunities at all. They're booking them into the toilet. If they could get a shot at NXT, that's worth it for the talent. For Jordynne Grace, this meant a lot. So what she had to lose? Everybody knows it's a work. It's not like, it's a big deal. And it wasn't a clean victory anyway. And we don't know whether she's going to double back and get that opportunity again or whatever's going to happen. Again, it's in this larval stage. We don't know how far this thing is going. If it ends this week and it's over, then maybe you could say the TNA WWE crossover didn't quite work out. But if it continues, then we don't know. But everybody seems to have the same attitude. Tatum Paxley is nothing. She's nobody. Who cares? Which is unfair to her because she's trying to tell a story here. That's what she was tasked with. She was tasked with telling a story to get over her character and to get out there and try to make the most of this thing. And she did her best. And I don't think that the match was bad. The match was good. It was just a foregone conclusion that Jordynne Grace was going to win. And I think that was disappointing. To me, that was the most disappointing thing. Is that I knew Tatum Paxley wasn't going to win because that would have been shitting in Jordynne Grace's mouth and say, oh yeah, we're going to beat you at our pay-per-view and we're going to beat you at yours. So no, they gave her a win on TV. They talked about TNA a lot. They got all this free publicity. It's not going to turn up in the television numbers because Access is still one of the worst networks in the history of the world. It ain't going to turn it around. They need to do something that's going to help TNA with their houses. And that's when you need to actually have somebody who is a higher name get promoted as an opponent for Jordynne Grace. Hopefully at their next pay-per-view, they'll get somebody higher up on the card, But all of this stuff is all tentative anyway. WWE isn't used to doing this kind of crossover. They haven't done this shit since, they did stuff with Japan in the early 90s. So they haven't done this stuff a lot. Give it time. Tatum Paxley was just one of the first people. And, interestingly enough, I looked to see which clips got the most views from their pay-per-view. Tatum Paxley actually had the most views from their pay-per-view. Tatum Paxley's entrance to the match with Jordynne Grace got more than pretty much anything else on this show. And it was a lot too, like 55,000 compared to like 14,000, 13,000, 12,000. And you talking about the Hardy Boys being on there. I think maybe Jeff Hardy, popping up got more. But Tatum Paxley did okay for them on YouTube. If she sticks around and they make her a regular, well, let's say regular-ish character, it may help. Now, finally, let's get to this here main event. But first, we have to go through the previous episode where the system, this being Alicia Edwards, Eddie Edwards, Brian Myers, and Moose, go to the Hardy compound to confront Matt Hardy. And this brought us some of the most wacky stuff that TNA has produced in a really long time. Now, my thoughts on Broken Matt Hardy is I'm sick of it. We're working on like 10 years of Broken Matt Hardy. It's almost 10 years. I think in 2026 it'll be 10 years of Broken Matt Hardy, off and on, through various companies. And the entertainment value of it waxes and wanes. It feels to me like it's a crutch. It's something he feels like he needs to do because he's not interesting on his own. But at the same time, it can have some fun elements. So before we get into the big main event, Matt Hardy versus Moose, let's talk about the Hardy Compound segment. So Matt Hardy is still talking weird. We get to Starcade. Now, the Starcade within Matt Hardy's house is actually pretty cool. It's an arcade. It's got old school video games and all this kind of stuff. And Brian Myers is in there. And he's getting harassed by one of Matt Hardy's chillin'. I mean, I don't know which child this is. I think it's Maxwell, the oldest one. But he ends up tricking Brian Myers into chasing him. And he chases him to the wrestling ring, where Brian Myers gets speared by a skeleton that is wearing a pair of Edge's old tights. And they play the song that he is Edge's bitch, because that's what Joe Hendry sang once. And so it was the idea that Brian Myers, no matter what he does, he's always going to be second to Edge. So a skeleton, wearing a wig, by the way, spears Brian Myers while wearing Edge's tights. I popped at that. That was a huge pop for me. As stupid as that shit was, I thought it was fun. Eddie Edwards, he runs into another one of Matt Hardy's chillin'. And this little one is named Wolfgang. And I'm like, they named their son Wolfgang? And this toddler is talking to Eddie Edwards and said that he's a werewolf. And Eddie Edwards is like, nah, I'm not a werewolf. I used to be one, not a werewolf anymore. And then the little one points to the moon. And Eddie Edwards looks at the moon and transforms into a werewolf. Bro, oh my God. My head almost exploded. I was like, this is insane. Right? This is crazy. Now, the Hardy stuff usually is like these guys firing Roman candles at each other. Like, that shit was excellent. That was really fun. Now they're just doing House of Horror stuff, right? Now, Eddie Edwards is a werewolf. So, he's turned into a werewolf by one of the Hardy children, apparently, or the moon, whatever one it happens. And the two of them are howling. The little Hardy boy is howling, and Eddie Edwards is howling because he's Wolfgang and he's a werewolf. Get it? Right? So, Alicia Edwards is the worst actress literally in the history of the world. She's really bad. She walks up to, quote, the gothic child, who is Matt Hardy's daughter, and Reba, who I thought left Matt Hardy a long time ago. That's what I was told anyway by the internet. Anyway, Reba has some kind of weird hairstyle that makes her look like Bulma from Dragon Ball. And she's playing the piano. And I tell you, Reba is really good with the piano. She's good. She's a good piano player. This is like the third or fourth time I've seen her play piano on television. She's good. She wants to get out of there. She wants to find the system and get out of there. The gothic baby, which is, again, Matt Hardy's daughter, blows some kind of confetti into Alicia Edwards' face. And she faints, passes out, collapses, or whatever. And then Reba puts her in a guillotine. No, a legitimate guillotine where she is strapped to a bed and a bladed item is dangling over her head. And Alicia Edwards is, again, one of the worst actresses in the history of acting. She's screaming and crying, you're crazy. Your whole family is crazy. Y'all are so crazy people. And Reba is like, yes. And then she pulls the thing and they cut Alicia's head off. They cut her head off. She's somehow still alive, but they cut her head off. I wish that was real. If there was anything I wish was a shoot, Alicia Edwards getting the guillotine is one of them. Now Moose goes into the house. He ends up in Matt Hardy's childhood home with, pictures of Matt when he was younger, pictures of Matt's dad, all this kind of stuff. He gets attacked from behind by Matt Hardy. He's knocked unconscious, then put in a wheelchair, and Matt Hardy gives him a ride to the lake of reincarnation and then dumps him into it. And then when Moose climbs out of it, he is dry, by the way. But he's wearing an old school New England Patriots jersey because he used to play for the New England Patriots. And what is going on? So at the end of this thing, all the members of the system end up outside the gates of House Hardy, and they're all fine. Nobody's beat up. Nobody's dead. Alicia Edwards still has her head. And Moose is shaking his fist. Hardy, I'm going to kill you. At the pay-per-view, you're going to die. And I'm like, so it was all illusions? Like, was it? Is that what it was? This is a haunted house? Look, I don't have a problem with this. I think it was over the top. The arcade thing popped me. I thought that was fun. The arcade in the house being called the Starcade is great. The skeleton wearing, Edge's tights, skeletons from the past. I got that. That was the only thing that I really liked. And Ribby playing the piano. I thought that was great. The rest of the stuff was very over the top. A little too over the top. It was very cartoonish. But that's what the Hardy thing is. It's silly. It's creative. It's an attempt to play on the history of the people involved. Because when you see like Moose inside of the house, he sees Matt Hardy, and Matt Hardy had played football in high school or something like that. So there's a picture of Matt Hardy with a football helmet and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of foreshadowing that Moose is going to have a football helmet. You get Brian Myers. He's in the Starcade with the action figures. He's best friends with Zack Ryder, who collects action figures. So you get that kind of thing. Eddie Edwards used to be called the American Wolf, so he turns into a werewolf. You get it, right? So those kinds of things contained within the story make it fun and make it interesting. But it's a little over the top. And I see how people so much hated it. But once I started putting all the pieces together about how they took each individual character that's in the system and played something from the past into the present, I thought it was actually fun. And I didn't hate it. I would rather watch that than watch Matt Hardy wrestle Moose. Because that's what they gave us for a main event on that pay-per-view. And let me tell you, it sucked. They had a broken rules match where Matt Hardy with his veneers explained the rules, to which there simply are no rules. I mean, there's no more to it than that. And it was exactly what you thought it was. It was a bunch of run-ins with the Nameless Brothers taking away Eddie Edwards and Brian Myers. And then you had Rebby Hardy come out there, and she's fighting off with Alicia Edwards, who keeps interfering into the match. And then, Matt mistakenly spears Rebby through a table. This leads to Moose hitting his big finish on Matt, and Matt losing the match. So Matt Hardy came into the company just to lose. Then the system jumped the Hardy family, beat him up. Then Joe Hendry came out there. Then he got jumped too because Kazarian came out there. And this all was built so that Jeff freaking Hardy can return. Roof blew off the place because everybody loves Jeff Hardy, even today. He makes the big save, and all of the baby faces stand tall at the end. Jeff and Matt are reunited in TNA. All is right with the world. You didn't get a big star from WWE on this show, but you got Jeff Hardy. So maybe they're going to do Jeff Hardy versus Moose at the next pay-per-view. I don't know if that's smart, but he's there, you know. There's been a lot of conversation about Jeff Hardy. People think Jeff Hardy's going to screw this up. Jeff Hardy's going to fuck this one up good. I am of the opinion that Jeff should probably retire, that both Jeff and Matt should just go get the Hall of Fame rings and call it a day. But as long as they want to make some money, TNA is great. They don't have to work that often. A lot is not expected of them. It's a light schedule. Their star power matters on this show. It wouldn't matter in WWE because they're not going to focus on them. They clearly didn't focus on them in AEW. They did nothing while they were there. At least here, what they can do matters. They're creative. They're allowed to be creative, as you can just see with the Matt Hardy stuff. They will let these guys do whatever they want. The schedule is light. It's not a lot of intense matches they're going to have. Nobody's going to ask them to jump off of ladders and, you know, fall off from high places or anything like that. They get to come in, be creative, spend the rest of their careers doing something that they enjoy. The schedule benefits them physically and mentally, so there's not a lot of traveling. There's no downside to this, unless Jeff Hardy is not completely clean. Other than that, this is a great move. It's a good win for TNA. They got the Hardy Boys. Both of them are washed. But there's enough Hardy Boy fans who will say, I wonder what they're doing. And they're still visible. You can still see them. So you got people on this show that people might want to see. At least Jeff Hardy is there. People want to see Jeff. And I like that. You know, what do you do with him? I don't know. Do you make him world champion? Probably not. Again, that flies in the face of what I just said in terms of light schedule and, you know, not having to put a lot of pressure on him. He gets to go in there. I would suggest, you know, bringing in some more people for him to work with and not have to work with Brian Myers and Eddie Edwards. I mean, for God's sake, if I was Jeff Hardy, I wouldn't want to take any bumps against, you know, Brian Myers, for God's sake. My bump card is almost full. Bring in some people who matter, or at least, you know, raise up some people who matter, you know, and I would do that. But Jeff Hardy in the company is excellent. I think Jeff Hardy's reveal, you know, him coming back, even though everybody knew it, because it was basically spoiled a day or two before. What it matters more than what WWE and TNA are doing. This is something for TNA that might actually help them fill buildings, something that might actually help them sell more pay-per-views. This is something that can actually benefit them as a company because he's going to be there. Whoever he was going to do this crossover with WWE, they're not going to be there long term. Matt and Jeff at least will be. And having something for yourself is better than borrowing something. You know, owning something of your own, building something of your own, it's much better than I'm going to borrow something that could be possibly cool. So them having Jeff Hardy works for me. The show, however, does not. The show was no good. The booking of this show is one of the worst of all time. The creative decisions are worse than the talent at this point. There's still some talented guys in TNA. There's some talented guys that have come through TNA that popped in and popped out, but TNA just will not do anything with them. They have to change. They need a whole new philosophy on how to work their shows. And unless it's in these guys, even if it's in the contracts of Eddie Edwards and these guys that they have to win, I would just throw those contracts away. These guys are not worth it, you know? But for now, they're putting more Band-Aids on the bullet wound of TNA. It's going to continue to bleed, but at least it may be fun to watch Jeff Hardy do some fun stuff. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.